This is Mark Treichel with another episode of With Flying Colors. This is an emergency episode on Wednesday, the 12th of August. Why am I doing this? Because NCUA has 0 board members. In history, NCUA usually 99% of the time has 3. Occasionally, they have 2. They've had 1 on a couple of instances, but the most obvious and telling instance recently was Kyle Hauptman being the only one after Trump fired Otsuka and Harper, over a year ago now. I'm going to walk through what's going on, but it hasn't really been covered in the press as to the fact that there are 0. And that's because I don't think they quite understand, because Congress has put somebody in, that doesn't mean they are in. And NCUA has not updated their website to say that Kyle Hauptman is gone, even though I have it from good sources. He resigned this week and he was sworn in at his new job. So I don't know if his commitment was, I'll stay until the Senate nominates Cruz, and he felt it was time to go. I think he left NCUA and the Trump administration in a lurch. That's just my take. As a former insider on the outside looking in, I think it's a bad look. 0 is not good. Fortunately, NCUA has a robust set of delegations that were in existence when I was there. Most of those, I believe, I know, are still in place. And I'm going to walk through what it means, what it doesn't mean for NCUA and credit unions. Now, funny story, a lot of times I can tell when one of my podcasts gets circulated around NCUA because the downloads are vastly higher on some of the ones that go into inside baseball at NCUA. The industry likes hearing that, but I can tell when a couple of my subscribers are NCUA folks and they send it around to their friends at NCUA, because there's not a lot of people at NCUA that understands how the delegations actually work. There's not a lot of people at NCUA left, particularly after the buyouts, that have anything to do with when there were 1 board member back in the Dollar administration. Of course, we have the Hauptman era, but I'm going to jump into what this all means, but 0 is not a good thing. So how did we get here? Over the last couple of weeks, over the last week, as a reminder, Hauptman's term ended August 25th. There are 6-year terms at NCUA that really don't mean anything now, as long as the legal actions recently about the firings at other agencies and Harper and Otsuka, if Harper and Otsuka don't win their appeal, we're going to be in an era when a president comes in, they fire the ones that are there and they bring others in. But having 0, the act says the board will do X, Y, and Z, and staff can't do that. So there are things that theoretically cannot be done while there are 0 board members. And I'll walk through that. But so Hauptman's term expired in August of 2025. A year later, August 7th of 2026, just last week, the Senate confirms John Cruz to take over, presumably as chair, right? Because he's going to be the only one. And the deal cut was Hauptman said he would stay until Cruz was in. To me, that's kind of like the Seattle Seahawks when they could have beaten the Patriots, and they could have run the ball from the 2-yard line, but they decided to get cute and throw a pass, and it got intercepted, and they ended up losing the game in the Super Bowl. To me, that's what Hauptman's deciding to leave on a Saturday really is. Now, will the agencies survive it? Probably. Will press get attentions of bankers to show that this is a little bit of what they always accuse NCUAs of as the Keystone Cops? I really wish Hauptman had sucked it up and stayed instead of getting over to his newer job where he's making a few dollars more. But again, I don't know his life. I don't know what he's dealing with personally. 1/2 week or a week or 2 weeks less of the higher pay so that there could always be a board member in place seems like something a prudent person, a person that cared about the industry, would do. All right, enough about that. Kyle's gone. We're just waiting for Cruz. Enough said on that. So Hauptman departs, like I said, August 10th. He resigned and he took the oath to become a board member of the PCAOB at a ceremony at the SEC. So now we're waiting for a ceremony at NCUA, but we can't get to that yet because the paperwork isn't done. And I think that's what the press is missing. So again, the seat is unfilled, waiting for Cruz to come in, tick tock. I'm sure Larry Fazio is fielding a lot of questions from within and without of NCUA. Larry's the current executive director, and there are some delegations that theoretically would say he could run the agency as the board, but I don't think that applies, and I'll get into that here shortly. So the math, there's 3 authorized, two are required for a quorum, and you can get into that whole, were the 11 regulations that Hauptman finalized last week, are they legitimate because they didn't have a quorum? Some people say a quorum of 1 is 1. NCUA's regulations say you need to have 2 to vote on something. So I don't think anybody's going to contest that because it's deregulation. And why would anybody who has an interest contest it unless it was a consumer compliance type group? But anyway, I digress. And now members currently qualified to serve are 0 because, again, they're waiting for paperwork from the White House, which can get political. It can get slowed down, and we're going to have to wait and see, what happens. By the time I post this today, who knows? Maybe Cruz will be in. But that's why I'm doing this one as an emergency, because its shelf life is going to be between now and whenever Cruz and the White House get their ducks lined up. So the Senate confirmed that was done. Then what happens is there's a commission that is issued. And what happens is it gets signed by the president, whether that's electronically or otherwise. I'm not going to get into that debate, wink. And the document comes over, it goes to the NCUA's SCIF, the Secured Compartmentalized Information Facility. The general counsel at NCUA is the person that's in contact with the White House to find out that someone is coming over, that the documents are coming over. And then the head of security will bring it up to general counsel and or the chief of staff. And now the chief of staff, interestingly, right now, Sarah Bang, it's my understanding, left NCUA the last day of July. And Nate Kroger, who is the acting chief of staff, a political appointee. Sierra Robinson is another political appointee over public affairs. Oftentimes what happens when there's a new board member who becomes chair, they either look from the Schedule Cs that they have, which are political appointees that have to be approved by the White House, not by Congress, but by the White House. Each agency has a number of Schedule Cs that they're allowed to fill. My recollection is each board office has 2, and then the chairman has 4 or 5, which is an alarmingly, not a shockingly large number for an agency of NCUA size, but it's been that way for forever. So what happens is the new person will come in. They've either identified someone they want to be their chief of staff that they will then get approved through NCUA, or they'll pick from the people that are there, which I believe would be narrowed down to Nate and Sierra. I've heard some rumblings that and I know historically what happens is those Cs start to fight for that position, just like at any organization. You're running a credit union, you got 3 VPs, you got your CFO, and you announce the position, and you have peers competing against each other. That's what happens in the Schedule C world typically. And my guess is both those people probably want to be the chief of staff instead of being in charge of public affairs, which is the OEAC office. So right now, it looked like Hauptman preferred Kroger because he was the acting chief of staff when he left over Sierra Robinson, but I could be wrong on that. That just could have been that they rotated it and each one of them did 2 months. I don't believe, though, that's what, no, it couldn't have been that because Sarah Bang just left. So anyway, when I was at NCUA at the end of the Clinton administration, Yolanda Wheat worked hard to get Norm DeMoore fired, and Yolanda came in for a cup of coffee 1 or 2 months as chair of NCUA. And she got that paperwork moved at the White House Office of Personnel by hiring 5 or 6 people from that office to get the documents moved. And there was some politics going on that I won't get into here. If we are ever chatting at a conference, I can explain it to you. There's some real inside baseball. But we basically, these are my words, got influence with the White House press to get her appointed as chair because she said, okay, if you do that, if you move that paper, get it moving for me, I will hire you over here at NCUA for a month or 2 or as long as I can keep you here, because Clinton was on his way out, his term was up, et cetera, et cetera. The commission has to come from the White House, has to be signed by the president. That's the bottleneck, right? We're seeing in the press that they have to have the oath of office signed. The oath of office where he raises his hand, and usually it's the general counsel who will swear him in, but sometimes they'll bring in other people to swear him in. It'll happen at NCUA's boardroom. Typically, they'll invite all their political friends, and it's an exciting day for the person getting sworn in. It's very cool. But that before that can happen, the paperwork has to move from the White House to NCUA saying the president has named Cruz the chair and has signed off on the paperwork so that he can start. Hauptman should have waited till that happened. He didn't. So NCUA is kind of in no man's land right now. Here a little bit, kind of not in no man's land, and you can assume it's going to be resolved quickly. But, in the Trump administration, who knows? Sometimes things happen real quick under the mantra of Elon Musk, Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. And sometimes they move slow. Hopefully this moves fast. So the finish line only after the oath of office is the seat filled, and then can they come in and serve as chair. What the statute permitted, the Federal Credit Union Act lets a member keep serving after a term expires until a successor has qualified. That provision is why the outgoing chairman was able to stay a full year past August 2025. And had he stayed, it would have covered this gap, but he left too soon. What actually happened? He left 3 days after the Senate vote before his successor qualified. The vacancy isn't something the statute forced. It's the product of Hauptman's departure. And it could have been avoided if he had waited a few days, a few weeks, whatever. But, again, NCUA board members' pay is capped at essentially what Congress makes, and Hauptman is getting a big raise at his new position. And that may have influenced him. Who knows? There may have been something behind the scenes that led him to believe he had to leave. But in any event, leaves NCUA in a predicament. So the agency was built to kind of handle unique situations like this. So again, the Federal Credit Union Act establishes what the board can do. And it can only be the board unless they delegate things. And I viewed the delegations of authority as my Bible, my equivalent of my NCUA Bible when I was there. Here's what this office can do. Here's what I can do. Here's what the board has retained. Here's what the chair can do. And there's a lot of delegations that build into what can be done by staff and what can't. So here's what keeps NCUA running. The delegations allow for exams and supervision. Field staff keep examining and supervising on the normal cycle. It allows for, that means you can still have DORs and findings issues. That means you can still have letters of understanding, which are the first step towards formal administrative actions. The regional directors have the delegated authority to take temporary cease and desist orders, not permanent, but temporary cease and desist orders. And that really doesn't matter because they don't do that much. The FDIC does cease and desist orders much more than NCUA, and that's more of a cultural difference than a real functional difference, in my opinion. Charters and mergers can go on. And this actually, I typed this out wrong. Resolutions, conservatorships and liquidation authority actually sits with the board. So you can't end a conservatorship. You can't make a conservatorship without an NCUA board member. Quite frankly, I think it was risky for NCUA to conserve credit unions with one board member because, again, is one a quorum? But that's the story for another day. So what stops rulemaking? There will be no rules. NCUA just did a dump of, that's probably not the best word to use. The NCUA just issued 10, 11, 12 final regulations from the big project they did. Most of those are changing happy to glad. I'm going to be working on a podcast in the next few days walking through those, but indirect loans, there was a good change there and a couple other good changes. But Kyle Hauptman, before he left, got all of those done as final, presuming that he has the ability to do a board action of one. But appeals to the board cannot. So if you have an appeal that's about to go to the board, it could be slowed down until Cruz gets on. And then when he gets on, he's going to be drinking water from a fire hose, right? He has to learn the agency. Everybody and his brother is going to want to come in and meet him. He's the only one. Being chair is not an easy job at NCUA, very time consuming for the staff. And oftentimes what happens if someone serves as a board member and a chief of staff for that board member and they become chair, they find out the difference between being a board member and being the chair. It is huge. So he's going to come in. I mean, he's a smart guy from what everybody says. He knows the financial world. And so that part will be easy. But the nuances of NCUA, and he'll be relying heavily on the executives that are left. Hopefully he taps into the breadth of the wisdom of crowds at NCUA and just actions that are delegated above. So there's actions NCUA can take, staff can take to resolve losses in credit unions of certain dollar amounts. If they're bigger than that, they have to come to the board. So that would be probably why the rumors are that they've made their decisions on Jackson area. I haven't seen the final decision on where that's going, but the decision to allow that to be merged or purchase and assumed to another institution acknowledges a loss that staff doesn't have the ability to do. So I'm sure Hauptman signed off on that before. Asset guarantees, which they don't do very often, are not allowed. Appointments and removals or promotions of senior personnel, people are going to be locked in their positions until Cruz comes on, and no budget changes beyond the $50,000, I believe, that the executive director can reprogram. So, but they have a budget. They're probably under budget because they got rid of so many staff. But it's a little bit of kind of like flying around the airport, hoping nothing bad happens and you have enough gas to land the plane. So the one that reaches your members, theoretically, if you were going to appeal, it goes from the examiner to the regional office to the supervisory review committee. You can take it to the Office of Examination and Insurance along that path. I don't recommend that. And then ultimately to the NCUA board. Now, I'd be shocked if somebody appealed today and it worked through all the timelines before Cruz came on. That would be real dysfunction at the White House, and I don't think that's going to happen. My guess is Cruz will be on before the end of the month, maybe before the end of the week. But without a board, appeals can't be decided upon by the board, right? There's the separate cloud of Otsuka and Harper who have continued to sue, and theoretically they could come back on. I think everybody thinks that the way that the Supreme Court and the courts are working right now, that they're going to be told, no, you were fired and Trump had the authority. But theoretically, they could come back and join Cruz at some point in time. And if that happened, I'm sure they'd be there the next day, assuming they weren't out of the country. But they'd get there immediately, and you'd end up having the wisdom of crowds of 3 board members that the Federal Credit Union Act had suggested would be the case. There is this final slide I have here. The agency runs fines without a board until it doesn't. And that's kind of like Mike Tyson said, it's great to have a plan, but when you get punched in the face, the plan ends. I quote a song often, what's the sound of one hand clapping as it relates to NCUA having 0 board members. And in that regard, there's an Elton John song. That first one was Van Morrison. There's an Elton John song called Too Low for Zero. And yes, NCUA is too low for 0, and they have 0. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I wanted to hit one other item that some people are saying does allow the NCUA board and staff to take action. There is a delegation that I don't have in front of me, but I'll paraphrase from when I was at NCUA. And I've had some conversations with some people that think that this delegation is in play now with 0 board members. And I would argue unless they made a change recently to this delegation, and then that change would have been made by 1 board member, so it probably could be contested. There's a delegation that was put in place, presuming that there was a national emergency, that like 9/11 and a plane went down, and however many board members were on the board were no longer available, whether they died in a plane crash and there was only one and that person died in a plane crash, which speaks to it being a national emergency. So in a national emergency, whoever is highest up the chain can exercise everything the board normally keeps to itself, right? The chain runs from the chairman to the vice chairman, then whichever single member would remain. So if there are things that the Act, for example, the Act says the chairman is the spokesperson of NCUA. If the chairman died in a plane crash, then the vice chair would take over those. If the chairman and vice chair were driving in a car together and they were in comas on their deathbed, then the 3rd board member would take over what the board could do and what the chair could do. Then you get into that whole debate of what they could do as far as a regulation, which would require a vote of 2 and a quorum and all that. But if none of those people are there, it falls to the executive director. who can push that authority further down as needed to keep the agency running on a day-to-day basis. But this is not a national emergency. This is a paperwork issue. This is Hauptman shouldn't have resigned until the paperwork was done. This is the White House just has to sign paperwork. This is not a national emergency. So the things that this delegation contemplates is not something that Larry Fazio, the executive director, can do, in my opinion, because there is no national emergency. It's just a stupid decision to let somebody resigning, not understanding how the flow went, somebody resigning because they were ticked off that they had to stay there a year and they wanted to get their paycheck higher, somebody resigning because they had a real life situation and felt like they needed to move over there. I don't know. It's just commit no minor blunders is one of my favorite quotes. This minor blunder of leaving too soon could have material impacts on NCUA. It might not. Because again, by the time I click end recording and upload this, maybe Cruz will be on board. All right, that's enough on this. I also have a podcast coming out on those 11 final regulations. I've got one slotted for an analysis of the recent merger data that NCUA has, and I've got some really cool guests coming up as well. I hope your summer is going as well as mine. And if you're listening, I want to thank you for listening. If you're watching, I want to thank you for watching. I hope you will do again soon.